A common question I get about Gloomhaven is, what is the best party composition? We're not talking about a number of players. I've already done a video about that, but what are the best characters to use together in order to have the most success? Well, that's not always such a straightforward question to answer, especially if you're playing in the campaign. The order in which you unlock characters might be a little bit wacky, or you might have a friend who really wants to play a certain type of character or really wants to play a certain character they've just unlocked. So how do you adjust as a party to come up with a composition that's going to work well and to continue to have success as you plow through the campaign and go through more dungeons? So before we go into Gloomhaven specifically, I do want to talk briefly about the Holy Trinity in RPG game design. Now, this is a concept that we're all probably very, very aware of. Maybe you've never heard the term before, but essentially what it refers to is the three pillars, if you like, of class design that we kind of expect and that we've really been kind of taught to really build our parties around or expect when we're playing any kind of role-playing game. These are tanking to prevent damage or to take damage. We've got healing to heal the tank and to remove damage. And we have damage, or DPS if you like, which is the classes that do damage. So you've got your warrior as your tank, you've got your cleric as your healer, and you've got your wizard or your rogue or whoever as your damage dealing character. This is really obvious actually in modern MMO RPGs, where both I think World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV kind of force you to role queue, in which if you want to go into a dungeon, you have to queue up as a specific role, and they try to form a party around those roles. So we've really become very used to, when we talk about going on an adventure in a dungeon or with a group, or if you're playing D&D, we've gotten very used to this concept of having a balanced party, and we all try and play to that, thinking that that's always going to be the best route for us. However, Gloomhaven often does not give you the opportunities to create perfect parties, and also most of the characters can play hybrid roles, do a bit of everything, or potentially go for some slightly different builds. So you have a lot more flexibility with the characters that you play, the order that you unlock them, and all of that stuff is much different here. So I think it can be dangerous sometimes to get completely locked into the mindset that, hey, you are dedicated healing character, you are dedicated damage character, and you are dedicated tanking character. It's much better to think of more as you're as a complete team, and whether or not you're all doing a bit of tanking, you're all doing a bit of healing, or you're all doing a bit of damage, it is a team effort, and it is that team that's going to get you through that dungeon. I think it's best to toss aside these stereotypes for the most part and instead use a dynamic points-based system in Gloomhaven, which is ranked to the 4 things I think are important and kind of crucial really to every team's success. These are control, damage, tanking, and healing. So we still have some of the elements there, but instead of looking at each character as being defined by those stereotypes of doing those things, we're going to look at how each different character can contribute in these areas to then hopefully add up to a sufficient team that can hopefully help you win some dungeons. Those of you who might have seen my Frosthaven starting character guide and who you should play in Frosthaven guide might find this a little bit familiar. We did do this before with Frosthaven, where we just go over the different characters and we try and rank them really. And actually in Frosthaven now, if you flip over to the other side of the player mats in Frosthaven, this sort of information is going to be there. So I think it's kind of cool to retroactively go back, talk about the Gloomhaven characters in the same way now that the Frosthaven characters are actually kind of being talked about and actually displayed on the mats in the physical game. I want to of course stress that this is my personal opinion, and this is just to be used as a guideline and for a bit of fun and a bit of advice. I have based this on the potential that each character can have. So of course you might build a character in a particular way that they're all in on damage. That's just the way that you wanted to build your character, or how you're going to build it. Well, they might actually have access to some great support cards too. So they might rank quite highly in that area, even though perhaps that isn't the build that you want to go for. But I just want to show the potential that these different characters have. Then you can see, well, just because maybe I choose these 2 characters together, that doesn't mean that they're completely incompatible, because this one's always a damage build and this one's always damage. Maybe you can find a nice middle way point with these 2 characters where actually they can both help each other out and contribute in other areas too. So we're going to rank all of the characters out of 10 in these areas. So control, damage, tanking, and healing. We're also going to have a target value for each of these, which is what I think is a good ballpark number to shoot for. Like if you were to achieve this number, I think you've got that base covered with your party. Control, I think, is incredibly important. It is one of the most important tools at your disposal when you're playing with increased difficulty, less so on lower difficulty, but certainly you need a lot of it if you play on +1 or +2. Certainly if you want to go even higher than that, +3 or even +4, it really does become everything that you need. So I'm going to say that we're going to target a value of 10 here. So if we can get a combined value of 10 across our mercenaries in our party in control, we're going to be pretty happy about it. Next, we're going to look at damage. Now, every single character in the game has damage. So damage is a really weird one to really talk about. Also, it's quite difficult. I didn't want to have to split out single target versus AoE here, because you could make an argument that some characters, although have very good single target damage, because they lack AoE damage, they are maybe not so efficient, especially at 4 players, because while they're just taking down one enemy, but there's so many more enemies on the board, so it becomes a little bit more tricky. So, but for damage, we're going to try and target a value of about 15, which should be really, really simple, pretty much with any 3 or 4 mercenaries. You'd have to really go out of your way to do this. But as a special note, I want to say here that targeting AoEs, especially high damage, big burn kind of AoEs you can combo off and try and clear a room with, I think quite important to try and find. So have a look out for those when you're building your characters too, because they can be a lifesaver in certain situations. And I really, really enjoy the big splashy plays. Tanking, I think, is still really important too. It's something that you're probably going to need. You are going to need somebody to be at the front of your party, either opening doors for you or being the first through a door, being that person who draws that enemy fire, because you're not always going to be able to control or kill every enemies. Enemies are going to attack, unfortunately, at some point. We're going to target a value of 8 for this. There are certain characters that can do this very, very well. There's certain characters that can just chip in a little bit here and there. So I think tanking, if we can get a value of 8, we're going to be pretty happy. Healing, as I've said before, is really the least valuable skill, I think, in Gloomhaven, but still useful. Characters that have self-heals can be pretty self-sustaining at times. You know, you just have your own heal, so when you take damage, you just heal yourself. It does take the pressure off there needing to be somebody who can also do targeted heals to other people. But if we target a value of about 4 with this, I think we'll be fine. A lot of the characters who have the potential to be a more dedicated healer will easily surpass this number, but I think that can kind of show you that maybe they don't need to take all of their cards in this area. Perhaps they only need to take a few and you just find your favorites to play with. So let's first take a look at just the starting characters. So for control, I've got the Mind Thief as the best here, really, with a strong 7. I think that combination of Perverse Edge and Frigid Apparition is just so strong. Incredible level 1 combo. You also get Hostile Takeover after only a few levels, and that is another great Immobilize. Ranged Immobilize can really help you out. Just think this character is incredibly versatile with control. Very, very good. We even get access to things like Curse a little bit later on as well, and Muddles. So yeah, I think this character is very, very strong in that respect. I've got the Scoundrel at 0 here. Not technically true. I've tried to not let one level 9 card for any of the characters really warp my judgment. Long Con is a incredibly good card and is an S tier level card, but you do only get it at level 9. And I don't really want to use level 9 cards here to color my judgment with these scores, because I don't think that would give you an accurate representation of trying to build a party early on in the game and trying to run with it. So Scoundrel gets a 0 because there's only one card, and that card is at level 9, even though it is very, very good. For damage, I think it's very close between the Mind Thief and the Scoundrel in terms of top damage dealing potential. I think the Scoundrel probably gets the nod early because of Flanking Strike being just very, very strong and not needing the Mind's Weakness Augment active. Kind of the Mind Thief has to take a turn off, right, to be able to get the Augment going, and sometimes doesn't want to even do that, wants to use Perverse Edge or wants to do something different. So sometimes there's not always the Mind's Weakness up, so that's why the Scoundrel, I think, gets the nod early on in the game. However, late game, I think actually the Mind Thief catches up very, very quickly and becomes very strong. Spellweaver, I think, apart from one level 9 card, is also very strong on the damage dealing, especially at early levels. This does tend to tail off though, and I think that's where both of these other characters kind of start to eclipse this Spellweaver character. Tinkerer does some decent damage as well, but that falls off of a cliff quite quickly. And also the Cragcart, I think, is pretty consistent, apart from getting quite strong in the higher levels as well. For tanking, I actually don't think that many of the starting characters are very good at tanking at all. I've given the Brute a 7 here because the Brute does have a good selection of shielding cards that they can play, especially as they level up. They get access to some quite good shielding cards. Also just have that big health pool, and they have the perk to be able to ignore negative item conditions. That's really going to be a big thing for you. If you can equip armor with a character, that's going to usually mean that they are going to be stronger at tanking, even if maybe their cards don't always lean you towards that way. Perhaps they don't have a lot of shield on their cards, but if they can wear that armor, that certainly gives you a little bit more flexibility. So the Brute pretty comfortably tops this category out of the starting characters. Say the Cragheart kind of comes up the rear a little bit because of the fact of that perk, and also they do have a few abilities that they can play to kind of shield up other allies, which is kind of interesting if you want to use the bottom of Unstable Upheaval. A little nod here as well to the Spellweaver and to the Tinkerer. Spellweaver has a very cute kind of damage mitigation build. If you want to use the bottom of Frost Armor, there are some damage mitigation abilities the character gets, which can be quite fun to play around with, but not necessarily, I would say, a winning way to victory, really. I think it's more of a weird build for a bit of fun, not necessarily something that I would suggest people run with in a serious party. And Tinkerer just has a lot of health and has the ability to shield up a little bit using the bottom of Flamethrower, so that can help a little bit too. So in healing, the Tinkerer comes out on top with 6. I think that's pretty easy to predict. Has lots of heals at level 1, also has lots of bad heals that you can unlock later on. I'm looking at you, Microbots, but it's definitely something that you can do. So if you have a Tinkerer on your team, you can probably ignore most healing that the rest of your party has, unless of course it's going to give you an additional benefit. So the bottom of Mana Bolt can obviously be enhanced with Strengthen, which is very strong, so you might just want to do that on the Spellweaver. Also, Empathetic Assault can also be enhanced with Strengthen on the Mind Thief. That can be very, very strong as well, maybe if you want to go down that route. So there are some options there. The Cragheart has some heals available to him too, and you can obviously use that if needed, but not really the way that I like to build the character. But you will probably have Rumbling Advance as a card in your hand for most of the time you're leveling up. So healing, again, I think you can pretty much do most of the healing without the Tinkerer. Most of the characters have a self-heal that is usable in some way. Okay, so let's talk about our target values then. So control was 10. As you can see, that should be fairly easy to get to here if you do Mind Thief plus anything else. The only combination of characters here that I think is a bit risky is going Brute, Cragheart, and Scoundrel. All three of those, if you're playing on increased difficulty, I think you might struggle with the lack of control, and you would really be very much pressed into having to use Warhammer and Trample and Warhammer and Unstable Upheaval in order to get those big stuns at least twice in the scenario. But then you're going to be probably back to square one because you might not do enough damage with those attacks, especially on +2 difficulty if things have shield. Trample is not a great attack, so there's things to be considered here. So you can solve these issues with items. Items can always solve gaps that you may have in your party too. That is worth considering. But I think that those three are probably the most risky here for lack of control. Damage really is the category which is really, I mean, this could be a range of numbers. I know we said we're going to target the number 15 here, but honestly, you could really make this 20, you can make this 25, whichever you want to do for different scenario types that you're playing. Also, damage can be found in very unique and interesting ways in Gloomhaven. You can find it through traps, right? You can push enemies into traps. That's free damage that you can get there. You can find it through wound. You can find it through retaliate. There are lots of little things that different characters can do to find damage. All I think you need to be conscious of is having a couple of AoEs in the bag. I think if you have a lot of characters who just do single target attacks, that can be a bit awkward when you do come to a big room and then there's loads of enemies and you're on the back foot and you need to deal with everything quickly, especially if there's lots of ranged enemies. Like if you get a pack of archers, 3 or 4 archers, and you need to just deal with them really quickly, you're going to need something to be able to do that. And so that's the only thing that I would think about with damage. But really, if you're playing 3 and 4, you can mostly throw any kind of characters together and you'll probably be okay as long as you're focusing a little bit on it and wary of it as something that you need to have. For tanking, I do think that this is something that you want to focus more on one character hitting this number 8 rather than maybe trying to split that 8 across multiples. I think the Brute comes quite close. On increased difficulty, it does drop a little bit. I think you can maybe share a little bit of the damage responsibility with others. Healing should be very simple for you to do. You're just going to need to have somebody with healing. So if you are going to be playing like the Brute and the Scoundrel together, that could be a bit risky because you won't have some kind of other heal that you need. And that's when, if you were looking to maybe add an extra character to the pie, I would actually maybe look at adding either the Cracker or the Tinkerer here, because they can actually do heals that can target other people. It's important to say here that really you can make up for a lack of healing and tanking with great control and killing enemies quickly with a lot of damage. If an enemy is dead, it doesn't really matter how much tanking you can do, it doesn't matter. And same with healing. You don't need to heal if you never take any damage, right? So you can definitely make up for a lack of these two things by improving your control and damage, because they are the aggressive way of going after a scenario. You're being aggressive, you're going towards the enemies and you're dealing with them rather than being more passive. I do think control is very underrated, especially by new players who maybe just start the game up. They might not think about control as much, maybe not think about what the enemy is doing as much, but avoiding the enemy is half the game, especially at higher levels. In fact, it's probably even more than half the game. And when you're playing at higher levels difficulty, just avoiding an enemy not taking any damage by either being really smart with your movement or being really clever with your stuns and your disarms and things that you have is just so crucial to performing well. So yeah, definitely can make up for the lack of healing and tanking, so don't focus too much on those. But for players who do really like to play with those things, I think it's important to mention them. All right, so that is all of the starting characters. So now I'm going to look at all of the unlockable characters. So if you are scared of any spoilers, I'm going to be looking at every single unlockable character in this next section. So now might be the time to turn off. So first, let's talk about control, and it should be no surprise really that the Soothsinger easily tops this category amongst all others. She is a very all-in control and support character, buffing her allies and just cursing, stunning, disarming the enemies constantly. She is incredibly strong, buys your team so much time. She doesn't quite do everything. She doesn't do all of the control for your team because a lot of her control is AoE based, or at least to begin with it is. So if you are playing, like, for example, a 2-player, it can be a little bit awkward because the enemies might be spread out, or if you're a 3, maybe they're not all clumped together. You really do need to get those enemies clumped first, and then once they're clumped, you can lock them down forever. So incredibly strong. I want to give a special shout out as well to the Beast Tyrant in this category, because I think playing the active Tyrant build is actually pretty damn good, quite good fun, and actually is a very good way for you to make up sometimes for a lack of control that other characters have. And I've been personally using the active Tyrant build on my Insane run through on stream, and I've really enjoyed it, and it's been very useful. So with damage, I really wanted to give one character a 9 here just to differentiate them slightly, but I do think that, again, a lot of the characters are very close, and it's very difficult to rank characters in this category because every character can be built as a damage dealing character in some way with a certain set of items or a certain set of cards. I ultimately decided to give Doomstalker the top spot. This is mainly just because of the fact that they can get permanent advantage through expose. They get a lot of high damage attacks at range, which means that they're often kept quite safe. They have Race to the Grave, which is just an excellent damage dealing card. They have Detonation, which can do some damage at early levels as well to multiple enemies. It's pure damage, goes through everything. I just think they have a lot of things they can do. And once you start blessing this character a lot, boy, do they draw ×2s like crazy, and it just really adds up. They can pretty much one-shot stuff. And they also have access to some pretty nuts big AoEs as well. If you wanted to go down like Darkened Skies route, you can certainly try and plow some resources into Darkened Skies, which I've done before, and I think it's actually pretty decent. It's not amazing. It's not as good as maybe some of the other AoEs that some characters get, but it's certainly a very usable big AoE. So yeah, Doomstalker I think ultimately tops this, but I want to give out another shout out to the Beast Tyrant, who sneakily does a lot of damage, especially if you go through Concentrated Rage build, just because that bear, just getting that extra damage and you're attacking you as the bear and the bear itself is attacking twice per turn, that can really add up. Berserker as well has a huge amount of damage. Flurry of Axes is one of my favorite cards in the game, and I think if you can get some blesses, get strengthened, and then walk into a room and do that, you can entirely level a room. So Berserker was another one I was very close to maybe putting as a 9 really, because they're, again, incredibly reliable, and especially once you get from, I think it's like level 6 onwards, they just start to get like really consistent damage. So yeah, they can do some really nuts numbers too. People might say, why don't you have the Night Shroud here as top? Because Night Shroud can just kill things immediately. The reason why I don't is because Night Shroud is very single target focused. Yes, it's very useful being able to just eliminate an enemy, but in certain rooms is a very selfish character to play, doesn't really help the team out, and is best played really when you're playing like 2-player, or maybe 3-player is okay. 4-player, that character is basically like a scoundrel, except it can kill things quicker than a scoundrel. Although I think the character is very powerful, can do a lot of damage, and does get nice cards later on. Certainly does some very broken, great things. Ultimately, I don't think that it equates to a great team damage role. So that's why I've slightly marked that down. Now, tanking is a category where I think it doesn't get enough love in Gloomhaven. I kind of wish there were a few more characters that could be better tanks. Jaws of the Lion kind of sort of adjusts this a little bit. The Red Guard character is an interesting kind of tanking style character that can definitely be used in that way. However, in base Gloomhaven, we don't have a lot, really. The Sunkeeper is the far and away best tank in the game. It's not even close. Nobody can even compete with her on that level. The amount of tanking cards that she gets, plus just defensive stance with enhanced, it's just permanent shield too. Other characters, again, I think that the Beast Tyrant has the ability to tank because of the bear. You can just let the bear take a lot of damage. That's like just another figure on the board taking damage. You can certainly heal it up as well, shield it up as well. So the healing is almost a little bit more rolled into the tanking stat here with the Beast Tyrant, I would say. But yeah, certainly got some good potential with the bear. The Elementalist as well has some sneaky fun tanking builds that you can go, and I find them to be a little bit more effective than the Spellweaver one sometimes because they're not burns and you can actually kind of reliably do them at certain points. Not really the way that I would advise playing the character, but I think it is potential there. Quartermaster is another one that comes close. I think is comparable to the Brute with their shielding cards that they get, but the fact that they can reoccur a lot of items does mean that they can reoccur those shields and that armor maybe a little bit quicker. So if you do want to go for more of a kind of tanking route, then Quartermaster isn't a bad option for a tank either. So with healing, the best healing character in the game is hands down the Sawbones character. The Medpack ability is specifically geared around this, but also you have loads of cards relating to heal, and if you go for an all-in healing build, I mean, the amount of healing this character can put out is pretty ridiculous, to be honest. Like I said, it is the weakest mechanic in Gloomhaven, so I don't think that's necessarily the way you want to go, but I think this character can easily heal the majority of your team, and I like playing this character in a more aggressive role, using a lot more of its damage and a lot more of its kind of control abilities, and its healing is kind of like a secondary element to the character, and using the med packs as stamina, really giving stamina to characters so they can go a little bit longer is also just a really good use for that character. Again, another little note to the Elementalist, and I keep saying it, but the Beast Tyrant, I think the Beast Tyrant is one of the characters that has quite a lot of versatility compared to many others. Yeah, I really like those characters for that too. And also you've got the Soothsinger, of course, with that soothing melody or that tranquil trill. You've got ways to remove poison, and in fact, just being able to remove poison or basically remove wound and become immune to wound in a way can be very, very strong with the Soothsinger. So to hit that magic number of 10 in control, you can see that the Soothsinger can pretty much do it all on her own. In terms of damage, as before, you can really just find any combination of characters and build them into a damage way. Soothsinger is really quite weak at this, unless you build her to not be, and she has one of the best attack modifier decks in the game. In fact, she has the best attack modifier deck potentially in the game using her perks, but just how often she's really going to attack, you're not really playing to her strengths, and you need those items to really make it great. Sunkeeper is the only character in the game who I think can completely solo tank pretty much. Obviously, if she gets to a really low health, you're going to need somebody to go in, but honestly, I think she can pretty much solo tank. Then, to be honest, you're going to be looking for maybe one of these other characters. Like I said before, you really want one character be the primary tank here, and you want somebody else to maybe just come in if needed and just take a hit here or there. I honestly think that you're probably really looking at only a few characters for your party. You're looking at the Sun, you're looking at the Quartermaster, you're looking at the Brute, you're looking at the Beast Tyrant, and that's pretty much it. You're not really going to have anybody else that can really do that sole role. So for heals, really, it's just a case of being aware of them and making sure that maybe you have a couple in your team and available to your team as a whole if you really need them. The best heals to really look out for are ones that also have good other halves of the card. So perhaps the other half of the card is actually really useful just within itself. Maybe it's got a great initiative. Maybe it's also got a good attack on the other half of the card, or it's got a good movement on the other half of the card. Just something that makes it more useful. So when things are going well and you don't need a heal, well, you've still got a great card that is usable to you. So those are the kind of heals that usually I look out for, and then I'll end up bringing in because actually they serve a dual purpose. But you do not need to go hard on the heals. Do not think that you just need to load up on all of these heal cards. That is a big mistake. I think you really need to concentrate more on doing damage and control before you really worry loads about healing. So definitely weighted a lot less this category. So I will actually save a copy of all of this data in my Gloomhaven tools spreadsheet, which I will link down below. So if you do want to check out this spreadsheet and just see all of the numbers in a spreadsheet, I will put it down below for you. I don't want to go into huge amounts of details. I mean, it's a super long video about each individual character. And certainly there are different builds, there are different items that you can get, everything like that. Like I've said before, can fill in some gaps here or there. So it's just really being aware of these core concepts and being like, okay, we don't have enough of this, and this is why we're losing. And a lot of the time it's that control category that I think people forget about, because actually that is really what can buy you time to do that damage when you need to, because you can't kill everything every round. Sometimes things will take 2 to 3 rounds to kill, and they're going to be hitting you for those 2 to 3 rounds where they're alive. So controlling them up can be super powerful. Okay, so what you've all been waiting for, let's talk about some of my favorite party compositions. So my favorite party comp of all time is the Soothsinger plus the Plague Herald plus the Sunkeeper. The amount of poison, curse, wound that this party can do is just insane. And the synergy in particular between the Plague Herald and the Soothsinger is just, I think it's the best personally that the game really has to offer, especially once you get to level 7 and you get that Baneful Hex. Enemies are just going to be flipping curses all the time, and they're going to be taking this direct damage through that, which means you don't even really need to attack. You've got the Sunkeeper who's there to just soak up that little bit of damage if you do take it, and also she can deal some damage too, so she's also just moving through the scenario attacking. You've got the early game synergy of Spread the Plague with Soothing Lullaby. So Soothing Lullaby can just heal that poison off every single turn potentially, and then you just keep doing it. It's just so crazy. Wistful Wounding plus the top of the big poison attacks, the big AoE attacks that the Plague Herald has. It's just, yeah, it's pretty nuts. So those 3 characters, I think, and the Sunkeeper really is just like more of a rock just to be in the front so that those 2 can do their thing. But wow, yeah, it is really good. Summons, unfortunately, are not as good as maybe we would hope in Gloomhaven. However, there are some really interesting kind of summoning type parties that you can go for and really go all in. So if you were to go for the Beast Tyrant character along with the Summoner character, along with say the Soothsinger to try and buff everybody as well, that can actually work really well. The Soothsinger is going to be a character you'll see pop up a lot because they can also just stun enemies, which buys time. It's a very good character for just buying time for your combos. So if you've got a combo between 2 other characters, bring the Soothsinger in because she can just buy you the time to ensure that that combo can go off properly or how you want it. And yeah, bringing them together, potentially even bringing the Mind Thief in as well, or even maybe the Doomstalker, because the Doomstalker has a lot of synergy with summons as well with some of their dooms and things that they can do. So definitely a very big kind of go wide style strategy that you can go for with summons, which might not be great success, but certainly a lot of fun. And yeah, something that I think a lot of people should try and experience. Characters that share or can create elements for each other are obviously very good combinations. So you're looking at characters like the Spellweaver and the Elementalist together in a party. They can work really well, just firing off loads and loads of elements and then fueling up for a really big simulacrum. That can be really good on the Elementalist for sure. You've also got like the Cragheart can feed quite nicely as well with some bit of earth into that. You really want characters who generate lots of elements that they don't often use. So again, sometimes the Mind Thief ends up with just a bunch of ice that they don't really need, and that can feed really well into the Elementalist. So that character in particular, I would say the Elementalist, is one that I would pair with another elements-based character that can really help you. Night Shroud and Sunkeeper can actually work quite nice as like an opposites party, where the Night Shroud will use the night element, create that and use that, whereas the Sunkeeper can sometimes consume that dark to then make light, to then do some other stuff with her cards too. and also she can generate an extra element very, very easily for the Night Shroud to use to be able to kill elites once you get the big kill elites card a little bit later on in the game. That actually works quite well, as well as the Night Shroud is quite a selfish character, so because they go invisible a lot, they don't get hit, which really means that the rest of the party needs to absorb those hits because there's really no tanking going on by this character. So having the Sunkeeper there as somebody who can take a lot of hits, that actually works really nicely too. If you're like me and you really like to go all in on a giant splashy burn attack and try and kill as many enemies as possible in a single turn, I really like the Berserker's Flurry of Axes card for this. I think it is probably the best card in the game for doing it. All you're going to need is a couple of characters to bless them. So you're looking at the Sunkeeper, you're looking at the Soothsinger. Bless them up, loads, get them before you go into this next room. Just get loads and loads of blesses, load them up, strengthen them, jump into the room. Make sure that you use an item to give yourself additional range, and then you can get some power potions, all of that good stuff, and you just basically go to town and try and kill everything in a single attack. So I really like those three characters together too. That can work really, really nicely because we've got some big attacks. Also, if you've got stuff like Glass Hammer and Resolute Stand, which can help you kill bosses, if you can funnel lots of blesses into that character and then you go for that, you can absolutely delete a boss incredibly fast, earn yourself a ridiculous amount of experience points on that character. So I can very much recommend trying to go all in, if you like, with that character and with that card, or with Resolute Stand and Glass Hammer too. I guess also I should really mention the 1-round dungeon clear group here, which you can check the video for that up there if you really want to check that out, where I go into detail about that. But it's the Plague Herald plus the Quartermaster plus the Sunkeeper, I believe, plus I think we used somebody else to go early. I think it didn't really matter who the fourth was, but essentially we're using lots of items. We're abusing the Quartermaster a bit to just loop a couple of cards and in the first round and essentially just kill everything. And it's pretty insane what you can do really with some of the most powerful items. But again, that is really like a magical Christmas land. So I think that maybe people might want to try in Guildmaster mode. It's not something that I would recommend you try in the tabletop campaign or just the campaign in the digital version either. Something for Guildmaster mode, just trying to get all of those pieces together. It's very difficult, but yeah, insane amounts of fun and definitely completely broken. Okay, well, I hope that kind of helps you start to think about building your party and start to see the different synergy that you can get there. I didn't want to ruin all of the mystery that Gloomhaven has here because I do think it's a game that's best experienced. But if you think about these core concepts, make sure that you've got enough control in your party, make sure you've got enough damage, make sure you've got enough tanking, make sure you've got a little bit of heal. Just focus on these things across all of your mercenaries. Maybe rather than focusing on one character doing one thing really, really well, then I think you'll probably have some great success and be able to build some really, really great and fun parties. Well, thank you so much for watching the video. If you did enjoy it, please do consider liking and subscribing or heading over to twitch.tv/mandatoryquest every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday where I stream Gloomhaven, and come hang out. And you can always ask me any questions you might have live there. If not though, thank you again so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Bye.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh,
Scout
that's the blessing from Cam.
Yeah.
That's the blessing from.
Isaac, at this point, can we get your approval to add an additional attack modifier deck for allies in the digital version?